Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When architect Milo Randall escapes to his secluded lake cabin, he seeks peace. Instead, he finds war, waged not with guns, but clipboards, forged documents, and a ruthless HOA president determined to erase him. A thriller where the battlefield is bureaucracy and the enemy plays dirty. I hadn't been back to the lake house in over 5 years. Life in Denver had a way of swallowing time whole. Between managing my architectural studio, client meetings, and the inevitable bureaucratic garbage that comes with owning a business, I'd all but forgotten the quiet place my grandfather left me. But something about that particular Friday, maybe it was the tension in my shoulders or the way traffic crawled like dying insects across I-70, told me I needed out. I needed silence, trees, smoke, something ancient. So I packed up my Jeep, grabbed a bottle of rye, an old canvas tent, and drove 3 hours into the Colorado timberline, straight to the place I used to think of as the last safe spot on Earth. It was near dusk when I pulled off the gravel road and passed the old pine split-rail fence. The lake shimmered just beyond the trees, stained orange and pink from the falling sun. The cabin sat in the same place it had for nearly 70 years, half leaning against the slope, with that busted porch step and cedar shingles that hadn't been replaced since Clinton was in office. I parked, stepped out, and the silence hit me like a hug from a dead relative. It smelled like pine needles, wood smoke, and distant thunder. Home. I spent the first 20 minutes doing what I always did. Checked the old fuse box, flipped the water pump, made sure the well hadn't gone foul. All good. Then I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid. Dragged the tent out to the back edge of the property, right near the water, under a patch of aspen that hadn't changed in my memory. I didn't pitch it for shelter. I pitched it because that's what we used to do when Grandpa was still alive. He always said, "The cabin is for winters and cowards. The tent is for men who want to hear their own souls rustle at night." I set up a small fire pit, the one we dug out years ago and lined with river stones. Threw in some dry wood, lit it, and let the flames crackle into the evening. Music came next. The old radio, solar-charged, playing low-signal blues over faint static. I pulled out my folding chair, poured a finger of rye, and leaned back to watch the smoke rise and blend with the stars. It couldn't have been more than 2 hours in when I saw headlights crawling up the dirt path, far too slow to be a camper and far too purposeful to be lost. A black SUV with Silver Pines Lakeview HOA Compliance Patrol stenciled on the side in dull white letters pulled up and stopped 10 feet from my fire. The engine cut off. Silence. Then the driver's door opened, and out stepped the single most aggressively organized human I've ever seen. "Good evening," she said, blonde bob. Clipboard. HOA vest zipped up to the neck like she thought coyotes might try to read her credentials. "Can I ask what you're doing here, sir?" I stared at her for a moment, confused more than anything. "Camping," I said, gesturing to the tent, the fire, and, not incidentally, the fucking house behind me. "On my property." She squinted. "Do you have a permit for the open flame?" "No," I said. "I have a deed." That didn't go over well. She stepped closer, holding out a laminated ID like it meant something to anyone not named Karen. "My name is Karen Emberly. I'm the newly elected president of the Silver Pines Lakeview Homeowners Association. This entire lakefront is under the oversight of our community guidelines. Fires are prohibited. Overnight camping is not allowed unless within HOA-regulated grounds." I gave her a slow smile, not because I was trying to be charming, because I couldn't believe the absolute audacity bleeding out of this woman's pores. "Ma'am," I said, "this property has been in my family since 1958. It was grandfathered into every jurisdictional carve-out when this HOA was founded. It is not part of Silver Pines. It never has been. I have the recorded plat maps, deed, and water rights to prove it." "You'll need to vacate the premises," she snapped. "Yeah," I said, "that's not happening." She flinched, but not from fear. More like someone realizing their authority meant as much as wet tissue paper in a rainstorm. "You may believe you're exempt," she said stiffly, "but any use of land adjacent to the lake affects the community. Your fire is visible from several of the Lakeview properties, and that tent is unsightly." I was genuinely speechless for a second, then I just laughed. "You're offended by canvas and a campfire? Lady, this is Colorado, not a golf resort in Scottsdale. "I'm giving you a formal notice of violation," she said, opening her clipboard and scribbling something down. "Great," I said. "You can address it to Go Fuck Yourself, CO, the guy who owns the land you're standing on." She didn't respond. Just closed the clipboard, turned sharply, marched back to her SUV, and drove off. I poured another finger of rye and thought, that's the end of that. 40 minutes later, red and blue lights reflected off the trees. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up behind my Jeep. And guess who was standing next to it? Arms crossed, lips pursed, like she'd just smelled a socialist. Karen had called the goddamn police. The deputy stepped out of his cruiser with the kind of walk you only get after dealing with too many bar fights, bear complaints, and lost tourists in a single shift. Middle-aged, short beard, bulked up winter vest over his uniform. Not hostile, not friendly, just weary. He flicked his flashlight toward the cabin, then toward me, then finally toward Karen, who immediately sprang to life like she was auditioning for a local news interview. "Officer," she began with a voice that dripped with phony concern, "this man is trespassing on HOA protected lands. He's set an illegal fire and is squatting in what appears to be an abandoned property." I blinked. "What?" "Sir," the deputy said to me, cutting through the tension with practiced calm, "can I ask your name?" "Milo Randall," I said. "I own this place." Karen let out a dramatic exhale. "He claims that." "I prove that," I said, already fishing my wallet from my coat pocket. I handed him my ID, then reached for the manila envelope I'd brought just in case. I wasn't expecting to need it, but paranoia, or maybe just 39 years of life, had taught me that when people see a black man alone near property, you bring receipts. The deputy looked over the documents, notarized copies of the deed, tax records, water rights registration, and even the original parcel map from 1957. His eyebrows rose as he skimmed them. "This is county registered?" he asked. "Stamped and filed," I said. "You can call the assessor's office. They'll tell you exactly what I'm telling you. This land was excluded from Silver Pines Lakeview HOA jurisdiction at the time of its founding. It's a private parcel. Fully legal. That," I added, pointing at Karen, "is someone trying very hard to pretend otherwise." Karen stepped closer, pushing between us. "He has an open flame. It's visible from 3 other properties across the lake. We have strict community guidelines." "Ma'am," the deputy said, holding up a hand, "if this property is not under the jurisdiction of the HOA, then its guidelines don't apply." "But the view belongs to the community. It affects everyone. Look at that tent. It's practically a vagrant camp." "Jesus," I muttered. The deputy gave me a look that was halfway between apology and fatigue. "Mr. Randall, I'm sorry to have bothered you. Do you want me to ask her to leave?" I shrugged. "That's between you and her. But if she steps 1 foot on this property again without an invitation, I will file for trespassing." Karen's jaw tightened. She turned to the deputy. "You're really not going to enforce anything? Not even the open flame?" "I'm not county fire," he said. "And the fire's in a pit. Low wind. Looks like it's under control." She glared at him, then at me, then at the tent, like it had personally insulted her. "This is not the end of this," she hissed. "No," I said. "It never is with people like you." She stomped off to her SUV and slammed the door hard enough that it rattled her windows. The deputy gave me a nod, handed back my documents, and walked back to his cruiser. The red and blue lights vanished into the trees a few minutes later. I thought about going back to the fire. I even poured another splash of rye. But the vibe was off now. That silence I'd come here to find had curdled. I sat there for a while, letting the flames die down, trying to convince myself this was a one-time encounter, an overzealous HOA president getting a little too high on her own laminated badge. I went to bed uneasy, and sure enough, morning brought something worse. I'd just finished making coffee on the Coleman stove when a large white truck pulled up outside the front gate, the kind contractors use when they're about to tear out a driveway or dig a septic field. The side was labeled Greenview Restoration Services. 3 guys jumped out hauling clipboards and rolled up blueprints. One of them, an older guy with a sunburnt neck and reflective sunglasses, walked up to the gate and called out, "You Milo Randall?" I narrowed my eyes. "Who's asking?" "Name's Barry. We've got a work order here from Silver Pines HOA to begin shoreline remediation, starting with pier removal and temporary structure clearing." I laughed. Actually laughed. "You're kidding me." "No, sir. This the address on the work order. We were told this was a consented restoration project funded through a grant. Everything's supposed to be ready for removal and leveling." I walked down, took the paper from his hand. There it was, my property listed as Common Use Ecological Impact Zone. Attached was a signed consent form with my name and my forged signature. I looked back at the man. You realize you were sent to demolish private property with a forged signature, right? He paused. You're saying you didn't approve this? You're damn right I didn't. And if you so much as put a toe on that pier, I'm calling the sheriff. Barry raised his hands. Hey, no need for that. Look, I'm just doing what the HOA told us. We do a lot of their work. Karen said the land was misfiled and she'd cleared it for improvement. I pulled out my phone. Then you won't mind telling all that to the sheriff while I call him. Barry immediately stepped back. Look, we'll pack up. Sorry, man. I don't want to be part of whatever this is. I didn't know it was dirty. He waved to his guys. Within 5 minutes, the truck was backing out, blueprints stuffed back into their tubes and dust kicking up behind them. I stood there staring at the crumpled work order in my hand. Forged signature, unauthorized project, an HOA that had the audacity to use federal grant money for a restoration I never signed up for. Karen Emberly had just made this war personal. It rained that night. Hard. I didn't sleep much, half expecting headlights or bulldozers or God knows what else to come rolling up my drive. I kept one eye on the window and one hand on the bat I kept by the door. Call it paranoia, but after someone sends a demolition crew to your property with a forged signature, you start reconsidering your optimism. The next morning, I called my old friend Trevor. He was an attorney now, mostly contract law and property disputes, but we went to CU Boulder together back in the day, and he owed me from that time I pulled him out of a bar fight he definitely started. Within 3 hours, he was at the cabin, sipping weak coffee from a tin mug and flipping through the paperwork I'd taken from the contractor. This, he said, tapping the authorization letter, is criminal fraud. And if they used this to apply for federal funds, it just turned into a felony. Karen submitted it under the HOA's name. She used your name to claim jurisdiction over land she doesn't own, he said, and got money for it. Trevor looked up, brow furrowed. You didn't see anything else unusual? No strange visitors? No other signs of activity? I hesitated. There were some protesters. He raised an eyebrow. Yesterday morning, group of eco-activists showed up with signs. Save the lakefront. Stop pollution. No more rogue fire pits. Trevor blinked. You're joking. I wish I was. They had matching shirts, printed banners. Looked like a college internship project. That's not a protest, he said. That's PR. Staged, funded, manufactured outrage. He pulled out his phone, typed for a second, and showed me a web page. Save Silver Pines. It read, official looking, with drone shots of the lake. Keywords like sustainability, community integrity, and, my personal favorite, unregulated fringe properties undermining ecological cohesion. There was a blurry photo of my tent from the night. Karen showed up. Beneath it, in bold, what happens when the fringe threatens the fabric? I stared at the screen, stunned. She hired a fucking media campaign. Oh, she's smart, Trevor muttered. She's not trying to evict you. She's trying to ruin you. Paint you as the problem, tie you up in code violations, and make the neighborhood so hostile that you either join the HOA or sell. A cold knot formed in my stomach. And it's working, he added. She's playing bureaucratic chess, not emotional checkers. As if on cue, a white sedan pulled up just beyond the gate. 2 men stepped out in county-issued windbreakers, clipboards in hand. One of them knocked on the post with the kind of bored authority I hadn't seen since the IRS audited my dad in 2009. Milo Randall, the taller one called out. Who's asking? Code enforcement. We received complaints about multiple violations, open flame without permit, unpermitted structures, shoreline contamination, and an unsanitary waste system. I exhaled slowly. Of course you did. They asked to see the fire pit. Then the pier. Then the small storage shed my grandfather built 50 years ago, which they referred to as a temporary living unit. One of them even took out a little vial to scoop water from the lake. Sir, one of them said, trying to sound neutral, do you regularly dispose of gray water or other waste into the lake basin? What? It's been alleged that there may be chemical runoff or direct disposal. That's a fire pit, I said, not a chemical lab. The shorter inspector knelt near the shed. Is this connected to septic? It's not connected to anything. It's where I keep fishing rods and the occasional busted lawn chair. They wrote everything down. photographed everything, measured distances like they were planning a damn lunar landing. I watched them with crossed arms and clenched teeth, reminded of something Trevor once said over drinks. The real enemy is always the clipboard. After 30 minutes, they handed me a notice of inspection with a follow-up citation pending lab. Results in structural review. I don't suppose, I said. You get a lot of anonymous tips about this place. The taller one hesitated. We've received multiple complaints from the local HOA. She ever send you brownies with those? He didn't smile. You have 10 business days to respond. You can file a counterclaim or appeal at the county office. They left, and I stood there with Trevor as the sound of tires faded into the woods. That was strategic, he muttered. Timed, coordinated, and absolutely on brand for someone who understands how to use the system like a scalpel. She's building a case, I said. Against me. Or a narrative, or both. We spent the next few hours going through everything. Paperwork, surveillance footage from the security cam I'd installed on the porch last year, old correspondence, copies of the plat maps. By late afternoon, we had a dossier forming. I felt like I was prepping for court, and in a way, I was. But it still didn't feel like enough. Karen wasn't just throwing noise at me. She was laying down a framework to crush me legally, publicly, and strategically. And if I didn't play smarter, not harder, I was going to lose everything my grandfather built. The next morning, I drove into town. Not because I wanted to. I hate doing anything that puts me near HOA territory unless I have to, but because I needed to scan and notarize everything we'd gathered the day before. Every forged document, every inspection notice, every photo. Trevor insisted on it. He said if this was war, then we needed our weapons legally loaded. I stopped at a small coffee shop near the county building, one of those spots where the baristas wear beanies year-round and everyone's on a first-name basis, unless you're not from around there. As I sat waiting for my espresso, I noticed a bulletin board near the door. Flyers, lost pets, guitar lessons. And then, tucked right between an ad for crystal healing and someone selling a canoe, a glossy, full-color pamphlet that made my blood run cold. Restore the lake. Reclaim our community. There was a QR code, a donation link, and a giant photo of my goddamn pier. Underneath, in bold, private interests are poisoning our shared spaces. Unauthorized structures like this are violating the ecological harmony of Silver Pines. I scanned the QR code. It led to the Save Silver Pines website, only now it had new features. A donation tracker, a calendar of upcoming awareness events, a section for community-submitted photos of violations, and right there, under the section titled Repeat Offenders, was my name. Milo Randall, with a picture of my house and my tent. Son of a bitch, I muttered. The campaign wasn't just growing, it was professional. Someone had thrown serious money at this, and I'd bet the deed Karen's grubby fingers were all over it. This wasn't just pressure anymore. This was reputation warfare, image assassination. I forwarded everything to Trevor, who texted me 5 minutes later. Backtrack the domain. Find out who owns it. 2 hours later, I had an answer. The site was registered through a proxy, but the payment routing? That led to a nonprofit shell set up 3 months ago by someone named Emberly, Karen L. I drove straight back to the cabin and found Trevor on the porch, laptop open, coffee in hand. I tossed him the pamphlet. She's crowdfunding my destruction now. He didn't look surprised. Good, she's getting sloppy. When people start seeking attention, they leave footprints. Footprints don't mean shit unless someone steps in them. He grinned. So let's make her step. It's time we pull a move of our own. He leaned in. We do a sting. Now, when an attorney suggests a sting operation over coffee, you usually ask a few follow-up questions. But Trevor had that glint in his eye, the one he got when he argued against tenured professors in law school, just for fun. He explained the plan. We'd plant a buyer, a fake one, a man interested in purchasing the lake property who would reach out to Karen directly, not me. Ask about the land. Ask if it was protected. Ask whether he could build. See what she'd say. If she told him my land was under HOA regulation, if she claimed it was protected, annexed, subject to rules, and put that in writing, that was it. We'd have evidence of willful fraud, not just overreach, intentional misrepresentation. The next day, Trevor's contact, a friend of a friend who'd done undercover real estate work before, posed as Paul Driscoll, a Colorado-based investor looking to develop eco-cabins for remote vacationers. He reached out through the HOA's official website, requesting information on potential lots. He got a response in under 6 hours from Karen. Her reply was polite, formal, and deadly. The parcel adjacent to Lot 14, currently occupied by Mr. Randall, is part of our Extended Ecological Oversight District. While the property's title is technically independent, the HOA maintains protective zoning rights over all lakeside parcels. Any future construction must comply with HOA standards. I'd be happy to walk you through the permitting process. There it was, in black and white. Trevor leaned back and whistled. She just admitted to claiming legal control over land she knows she doesn't own. Can we use that? We will use that, he said. We're going to make her regret ever opening that HOA newsletter, but it wasn't over yet. The next day, I received an official notice from the County Environmental Protection Office. Based on recent complaints and inspections, my property was now under temporary ecological review status, which meant no construction, modification, or fire activity until further notice. I couldn't pitch a tent. I couldn't use my dock. I couldn't so much as fish. I read the letter 3 times. Trevor was on the phone with a judge before I finished the second pass. Karen had just crossed from nuisance into full-on malicious territory. This wasn't about aesthetics anymore. This was about erasing me, not just from the lake, but from the map. And now we had the ammo to hit back. For a moment, I actually thought about leaving, not selling, no. I wouldn't give Karen that satisfaction if she paid me in solid gold apologies, but just walking away for a few days, letting the dust settle, maybe go back to Denver, regroup. Try to convince myself that this wasn't spiraling into some HOA-fueled version of enemy of the state. But then I opened my inbox. It was a forwarded email from a neighbor I barely knew, Tom Kinney, an older guy who lived on the opposite side of the lake. He wasn't part of the HOA either, as far as I knew. Just one of those quiet, semi-retired types who kayaked before sunrise and didn't say much unless spoken to. His message had no subject line, just a note. Figured you'd want to see this. Attached was a PDF newsletter from Silver Pines Lakeview HOA. Headline at the top, bold serif font. Unregulated parcel threatens community safety. Immediate action required. Beneath it was a photo of my house again, only this time it had been filtered to look darker, like something out of a horror movie. The pier was labeled unstable structure. The fire pit was outlined in red. The words environmental violation, fire risk, and unbelievably transient activity were scattered throughout. But the kicker was the final paragraph. Multiple complaints have been received about the occupant of this non-compliant property. Until a formal resolution is reached, the HOA strongly encourages residents to avoid direct engagement and to report any suspicious behavior to local authorities. They'd painted me as some kind of dangerous drifter on my own land. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding, then called Trevor. She's turning the neighbors against me. She's trying to isolate you, he said. Standard power tactic. If you're boxed in socially, you're weaker in court and public perception. She's pushing me toward a fight, I said. Then give her one, but on your terms. He paused. There's something you should see. Check the county zoning applications from last month. I opened the website while he guided me through the search. And there it was. Application. Proposed reclassification of parcels for environmental reclamation. 4 parcels were listed. 3 were HOA-owned properties near the walking trail. The 4th, my land. And beside it, in the digital file, signed consent from parcel owner M. Randall. Trevor cursed. She filed it as part of an ecological rezoning package. If that goes through, the county will mark your land as non-compliant conservation territory. You'll have a hell of a time getting that reversed. She's trying to turn my land into parkland. With you still on it, he added. That's the beauty of it. She's using the system like a crowbar, leveraging paperwork until the land cracks under her weight. We submitted a formal legal objection that same day. Trevor filed paperwork accusing the HOA of fraudulent activity, attaching the buyer sting email, the forged consent forms, and the community smear campaign as part of an organized scheme. But we both knew it would take weeks before the county would even acknowledge the claim, let alone act on it. And Karen, she wasn't slowing down. The following weekend, I woke to the sound of chanting. I stepped outside and saw a group of people gathered by the lake's edge, signs, megaphones, chants about clean water and lake justice. At the front of the group, in a wide-brimmed sun hat and North Face vest, stood Karen, waving a clipboard like Moses parting the Red Sea. "Good morning, Mr. Randall," she shouted over the megaphone. "We're hosting a public awareness event. You're welcome to join, as long as you follow community guidelines." Someone tried to hand me a flyer. I didn't take it. Trevor, who had stayed the night again, appeared behind me. "She's not organizing protests," he said. "She's filming them. Look." Sure enough, there were 2 cameras set up near the parking area. One of them had a tiny boom mic attached. They weren't just making noise, they were making content. By Monday morning, the HOA Facebook group was flooded with edited clips showing Karen surrounded by concerned citizens, while ominous shots of my tent and pier played in slow motion under dramatic music. They even slowed down a shot of me walking out to the dock and zoomed in like it was the Zapruder film. The caption read, "When one refuses to care, we must act together." Trevor was furious. I was just numb until I got the letter, official seal. Certified mail, a formal summons to appear at a civil hearing. The HOA had filed a motion requesting a temporary injunction against me, citing persistent environmental violations and disruption of community safety. Trevor laughed when he saw it. "They're suing you over your own land using evidence they manufactured from a campaign they staged. This is incredible. It's also fucking insane." He nodded. "Insanely illegal and very, very actionable." But it didn't stop the unease in my gut. Karen wasn't just trying to win, she was trying to break me. Reputation, finances, nerves, everything. That night, I sat on the porch with a cold beer and watched the lake breathe. Somewhere across the water, I saw the flicker of a phone screen, someone filming me from the shadows. I didn't flinch, because I finally knew what kind of war this was. And I was done playing defense. I spent the next 48 hours turning my lake house into a command center. Trevor cleared his schedule and practically moved in. We printed everything: documents, screenshots, public records, HOA emails, footage from the awareness events, social media posts from Karen's PR campaign. The coffee table was buried under color-coded folders. The corkboard on the wall, which once held fishing maps and postcards, now looked like a conspiracy board in a crime drama. Because it was. Only this wasn't fiction. This was real. And Karen had crossed every possible line. The civil hearing was set for the following Tuesday, but we weren't going to wait around to play defense anymore. Trevor filed a counterclaim, not just against the HOA, but against Karen personally. Charges included defamation, harassment, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He also requested an immediate injunction against further activity on or near my property, including protests, inspection requests, and any physical approach by HOA officials. And then we dropped the bomb. We filed a formal fraud complaint with the Colorado Office of the Attorney General, citing Karen's use of falsified consent documents to apply for a federal grant with supporting evidence, including the fake signature, the contractor's statement, and records of the grant application that she submitted on behalf of the HOA. Trevor attached the sting email from Paul Driscoll, showing Karen knowingly misrepresented my parcel's status to a potential buyer. It wasn't just a civil war now, it was criminal. That Friday, we got confirmation. A state investigator had opened a case file. The feds were watching, but Karen didn't know that yet. She was still riding the high of her own fiction. Saturday morning, a new newsletter dropped in mailboxes and inboxes alike. This one was pure theater. Headline: Silver Pines fights back. HOA seeks legal protections against hostile resident. It painted me as aggressive, disruptive, and uncooperative. Claimed I refused inspection, endangered environmental integrity, and harassed volunteers. The best line, though? While we sympathize with Mr. Randall's personal struggles, the safety and unity of our community must come first. I wanted to rip the thing in half. Trevor just laughed. She's setting herself on fire and trying to frame you for arson. He was right. It was textbook projection, but that didn't mean it wasn't dangerous. The hearing was 3 days away. Every false narrative she spread was another grain of bias waiting to sway a judge. So I decided to hit back in a way Karen couldn't spin. Monday morning, I walked into the county building with Trevor and filed a formal request for public HOA records under Colorado's Common Interest Ownership Act. As a non-member, I had the right to request documents related to any HOA action that might impact my property. Karen had no idea we'd done it. 2 hours later, the clerk handed us a flash drive. And that's when we struck gold. The drive included internal HOA meeting minutes, correspondence logs, and, jackpot, a scanned environmental improvement proposal that listed my parcel as currently unregulated but subject to informal annexation upon community approval. And then, in the margins of one meeting summary, scribbled by hand next to my lot's number, if pressure doesn't work, push the zoning angle. Force participation or create non-compliance. Trevor just stared at it, then looked at me. They were plotting this months ago. This was never about nature, I said. This was about conquest. That night, we prepped exhibits, redacted sensitive info, and bound everything into court-ready packets. We were going in armed, no longer begging to be left alone. Now we were kicking the door in. But just as we were finishing up, Trevor's phone buzzed. He picked it up, frowned, then handed it to me. It was a video, posted just minutes ago to the HOA Facebook page. A shaky clip showing someone, filmed at night, pouring something into the lake. It was me, dragging a bucket down to the water, only they'd cut the video to make it look like I was dumping waste. In reality, I'd been hauling sandbags to reinforce the shore before the rainstorm. They blurred the footage slightly, added dramatic music, and the caption read, "Caught in the act. Sire, protect our lake." Trevor paced. "This is defamation, deliberate, edited." That's another count. But now she's gone public with lies. She's escalating before the hearing, trying to poison the well. I looked at the screen. My face, twisted and grainy in low light, now branded for hundreds of HOA followers as the villain. Karen didn't just want to win. She wanted to make sure no one remembered who I was by the time she was done. Tuesday morning came colder than it should have been for late spring. Fog hovered over the lake like smoke that refused to rise, and my stomach twisted tighter with every mile we drove toward the county courthouse. Trevor, as usual, was calm, wearing the same navy blue suit he always wore when he was about to dismantle someone piece by piece in front of a judge. I'd seen him do it in law school. I was counting on him to do it now. The courthouse was half filled with the usual suspects, low-level traffic cases, property disputes, the odd small claims drama. But in the gallery behind us, half a dozen Silver Pines residents, some of them the same faces I'd seen chanting outside my house the week before. And there, of course, seated at the plaintiff's table, was Karen Emberly, looking like she was about to be handed a key to the city. She had a manila folder stacked high with evidence, a smug smile, and a lawyer who looked like he billed by the syllable. The judge entered. The room rose. Court was in session. Karen's attorney went first. He spun a tale so polished it could have aired on PBS. According to him, I was a disruptive squatter, posing an environmental threat, intimidating neighbors, and refusing to comply with reasonable community standards. They showed photos, carefully selected, cropped, framed to imply I was negligent, hostile, dangerous. Karen sat stiff beside him, nodding along, occasionally whispering into his ear like she was dictating scripture. When they brought up the video of me polluting the lake, they paused for dramatic effect. They even printed a still image on a foam board, pointing to the bucket in my hand like it was radioactive waste. Then it was our turn. Trevor stood, adjusted his tie, and opened calmly. "We are here today not because of environmental concern," he said, "but because of a deliberate campaign of harassment, fraud, and coercion orchestrated by the plaintiff and carried out under the guise of HOA authority." He moved like a surgeon. Exhibits, maps, screenshots. He walked the judge through every document, the forged consent form, the false zoning applications, the sting email with Karen's signature misrepresenting my land status. Then he dropped the kicker. He handed the court a printed screenshot of Karen's HOA meeting notes, the one with the handwritten line, "If pressure doesn't work, push the zoning angle, force participation, or create non-compliance." The room shifted. Karen leaned forward, lips parting slightly like she'd just realized she brought a fork to a gunfight. Trevor continued. He explained how Karen used a nonprofit shell to apply for federal grant money, using my name and property as leverage. He cited statutes, Colorado criminal codes, federal fraud violations, HOA overreach precedents. Then he brought up the media campaign, showed how footage was manipulated, how public perception was weaponized. The judge listened in near silence. Finally, I took the stand. Trevor kept it brief. I told the truth about my grandfather, the deed, the cabin's history, the timeline of harassment. I was calm, direct. I didn't beg for sympathy. I just told the story as it happened. I told the court what it felt like to be gaslit with legalese, bullied with banners, slandered in my own county. I told them what it's like when someone with a clipboard and a taste for control tries to erase your name from land your family's bones are buried in. Then Karen took the stand. And that's when it all unraveled. At first, she was composed. She recited her talking points like she'd rehearsed them in the mirror. Community safety, environmental concern, visual harmony, blah, blah, blah. But then Trevor started asking questions. One by one, calmly, he poked holes in her narrative. He showed her a copy of the fake consent letter. Is this your signature? No. Is it your organization's letterhead? Yes. Was it submitted as part of a federal grant package? Pause. Yes. Was Mr. Randall ever notified? He didn't need to be. The land is not part of your HOA, correct? Her face flushed. It affects the aesthetic of our community. Trevor didn't blink. You admitted, in writing, that the land is technically independent. You misrepresented its status to both the federal government and to prospective buyers. You staged public events to portray Mr. Randall as a hostile actor when in fact he has full legal ownership of that parcel. Is that correct? I was trying to preserve the integrity of Silver Pines. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Emberly, answer the question. Silence. Finally, I didn't forge anything. Trevor slid the work order from the contractor across the bench. Then how did your name end up on a demolition request using a forged consent form with your HOA's billing account? Karen stared at the paper like it had just insulted her mother, and then, for the first time in the whole process, she slipped. She muttered something under her breath about how we wouldn't be in this mess if the damn cabin had just burned down when it was supposed to. The courtroom went still. Trevor looked at the judge. No further questions. The judge recessed for deliberation. 30 minutes later, he returned with his ruling. The HOA's injunction was denied in full. My counterclaim, approved. Karen Emberly was ordered to personally pay $300,000 in damages for defamation, fraud, harassment, and property interference. The HOA itself was placed under state investigation for grant abuse and procedural misconduct. And then the final nail. The judge referred Karen's use of forged documents for grant acquisition to the district attorney's office for criminal review. The look on her face as she was served with notice in that courtroom, worth every sleepless night. But it still wasn't over, because 2 days later, the sheriff knocked on her door. The headlines hit local news first, then spread across homeowner forums like wildfire. HOA. President arrested in federal fraud investigation. Grant scheme unravels in Silver Pines. Residents stunned. Karen Emberly charged with forgery, fraud, and abuse of authority. I watched the footage from my couch. The sheriff's office had released a statement that morning confirming the charges. Falsification of federal documents, fraudulent misuse of grant funds, and attempted coercion of property rights through deceptive practices. 9 counts in total. Karen had been taken into custody without incident, her oversized sunglasses doing a piss-poor job of hiding the fury on her face as she was led out in handcuffs. Her mugshot was everywhere by sundown. Somewhere in Denver, Trevor was opening a bottle of scotch. I could feel it. Back at the lake, the fog had lifted, literally and metaphorically. The protests had stopped. No more late-night chanting, no fake eco-parades. The HOA website had gone dark for maintenance. The Save Silver Pines donation page was taken down by morning, and the community newsletter that had once printed propaganda against me. Well, the next issue printed a retraction the size of a grocery list. I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Bureaucracies never die. They just regroup, rebrand, and replace their monsters with new ones in better shoes. But Karen was done, and her brand of HOA terrorism had been buried under the weight of her own paperwork. 3 weeks after the trial, I was back on the dock, this time with a fresh coat of varnish, a new fishing rod, and a cold beer sweating in my palm. The pier looked better than it had in decades. I'd taken the money from the court judgment and hired a local contractor, someone not tied to HOA restoration schemes, to rebuild the shore with native plants, reinforce the structure, and make damn sure no one could claim it was a public risk. Again, that weekend, I hosted a bonfire. Nothing fancy. Just a few friends from Denver, a couple of old-timers who knew my grandfather, and even a couple neighbors who'd stayed quiet through the whole mess. People I thought were indifferent turned out to be quietly supportive. Turns out a lot of them hated Karen too, just not loudly enough to do anything about it until the walls caved in. I didn't blame them. Fear is a powerful leash. But now, we laughed. We roasted marshmallows. Someone brought a guitar. For the first time in months, the only thing I could hear over the crackle of fire was peace. As the last embers dimmed, I walked back to the porch and looked out over the lake. Mounted beside the door now, in plain view, was a brand new wooden sign. Burned letters, carved deep. Private property, not HOA. Not Karen. Not ever. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Somewhere out there, new HOA board members were probably drafting apologies, denials, or maybe just burying records under new bylaws. Let them. My land was mine. My voice was no longer a whisper in a bureaucratic wind tunnel. And best of all, I'd never see another SUV marked HOA Compliance Patrol roll up my dirt path again. The cabin, the lake, the silence. It was finally mine again.